As it turns out, the Wu-Tang Clan are not the only legends to come out of Staten Island. Pete Davidson is one of the funniest and most popular working comedians that we have today, although there is a couple different places where you may know him from. Whether you're a long-standing fan of his stand-up comedy or his roles in films like The King of Staten Island, perhaps you're familiar with Pete from his appearances on SNL. However, many of you may know Pete from his highly publicized relationships with Hollywood A-list women such as Ariana Grande and Kim Kardashian. Or you have confused him with Travis Barker or Machine Gun Kelly. It can sometimes feel like we see and hear about Pete everywhere. But regardless of where you know Pete from, he's highly acclaimed at his craft and within the world of comedy. However, all too common with great comedians, that ability to create infectious laughter often comes from a place of anguish and hardship, which Pete's childhood was absolutely filled with, and is a contributing factor to the man that we know today as Pete Davidson. Pete has been pretty vocal about his struggles and journey with mental health. It's often the subject of his jokes, sketches, and interviews. He really does own it, and it's one of the many reasons people love him. So if you want to know more about the story of Pete Davidson before becoming one of the world's biggest comedians, then stay tuned. Peter Michael Davidson was born in the New York City borough of Staten Island on November 16, 1993. The son of Amy, a nurse, and Scott, a New York City firefighter. He and his youngest sister Casey grew up in the Great Kills neighborhood of the island. While many have mistaken him for being of mixed race, Pete is in fact Caucasian with Jewish, Irish, Scottish, and German ancestry, among others. Pete has been hilariously honest in his take of growing up in Staten, once describing it in his stand-up as New York's abortion that lived. It's pretty hilarious and admirable the way Pete consistently reps Staten Island, even if it's by him not exactly praising it. However, I think it's pretty safe to say that Pete Davidson is probably the best thing to ever come out of Staten Island, along with the Wu-Tang Clan. Now, while we're chronicling the life of a man who can easily light up a room with infectious laughter, Pete really comes across as a guy you'd enjoy to be around or grab a drink with. However, the story of Pete's childhood is not all laughter and fun. It's important to acknowledge the tragedies that ultimately shape people's lives, and this tragedy was truly one that not only affected Pete's life, but the entire world. Shortly after his parents divorced, when Pete was just 7 years old, his father Scott perished in the World Trade Center on September 11, 2001. An American hero, he and several other firefighters raced from Ladder Company 118 in Brooklyn Heights and were helping evacuate the Marriott building when it collapsed. To honor his father, Pete now has his badge number tattooed on his arm. As you could guess, his father's untimely death left quite the impact on a young Pete, often causing him to act out as a way of coping, even ripping out his hair until he went bald. While attending numerous therapy sessions, doctors would often examine Pete. He even recalled students from Columbia University visiting him at his home to interview him. Pete had described this experience as being a lab rat for physicians who were eager to discover and understand the mental trauma inflicted upon children directly after the attacks. But to balance out the negativity, his mom eventually sent him to a camp in Massachusetts for children who lost parents during the attack, something he described as a sweet experience. While Pete did receive support and care from some adult figures, people his age were not as generous. Attending 3 separate schools, including an all-Catholic one for boys, he described his fellow students as being incredibly mean. With very few friends, Pete detailed a story where a random kid invited him to his birthday party. Upon approaching to thank him at the event, the boy said he only invited him because his mom felt sympathy. Pete said at one point he even contemplated suicide, but the music of Kid Cudi eventually helped him out of the circumstance. Over the years, he has been an outspoken fan of the rapper, and the two clearly have a bond, as Kid Cudi once tweeted at Pete to hit him back during one of Pete's breakdowns on social media. Pete soon found refuge in the world of entertainment. Aside from his love for the Man on the Moon, he grew up as an avid fan of the Harry Potter series as well as stand-up comedy. As a kid, his mom brought him a copy of what she thought to be the new Eddie Murphy movie. That movie was in fact his legendary comedy special, Delirious. And I think it's safe to say our guy learned a few new things that night. One night at a bowling alley in Staten, his friends dared him to go up on stage and tell jokes, as they knew it was always an aspiration of his. Initially hesitant to take the leap, Pete got it done with a little help from Mary Jane. While the attempt was only a mild success, Pete caught the stand-up bug. His mother Amy driving him to gigs in the city, he soon found an outlet for all his pain, all while becoming a familiar face on the New York open mic circuit. And you could really tell Pete was a natural with his own unique disposition on things, once doing a show at age 17 telling the crowd he loves cougars, 21-year-olds are so hot. Soon after, Pete was enlisted by the Reverend Bob Levy of the Howard Stern Show to be his opening act. Together, the two would travel throughout the New York area, even playing at pizza joints in Jersey. It was during this time that Pete was diagnosed with Crohn's disease, and from then on, the aspiring comic became dependent on marijuana. Pete would often describe cannabis to be a savior for his experience with Crohn's, which without the aid of its medicinal properties, the condition would render Pete in so much pain he couldn't even do gigs or write jokes, but smoking would provide that relief for him to be able to do his job. Continuing his comedic endeavors, it became clear that Pete was a standout talent to be reckoned with on stage. When he was 17, Wild 'N Out host Nick Cannon saw his wit and invited him to be featured on the show. And he would go on to create moment after moment, making jokes that really hit home, especially when going at Nick himself. This element of Pete's comedy would prove to be one of his best. His ability to roast and make fun of people was elite. There are entire compilation videos online dedicated to Pete absolutely obliterating other celebrities. And yes, you need to watch the compilation of him roasting Ann Coulter at the roast of Rob Lowe. It wasn't even her roast, and it was hilarious. Along with appearances on MTV's Guy Code, as well as televised stand-up appearances on Jimmy Kimmel Live and Adam Devine's House Party, viewers began to grow familiar with Pete's hilarious onstage antics and take on growing up as a millennial. Such of his subject matter was aimed at his family life, as well as a brief stint at St. Francis College in Brooklyn. While filming a scene in the Amy Schumer movie Trainwreck, Bill Hader met Pete and told Lorne Michael about the young comic. This led to fate taking an unexpected turn. In 2014, at just 20 years old, Davidson made his debut as a featured player on Saturday Night Live, becoming the fourth youngest cast member in the show's history, as well as the first cast member to be born in the 90s. Pete began to enjoy weekly exposure on the channel, being featured in several memorable sketches, including a recurring character role as the Weekend Updated resident young person. But it wasn't until the 2015 roast of Justin Bieber on Comedy Central that people really started taking notes. Sharing the stage with roastmaster Kevin Hart as well as Jeff Ross, Shaq, Martha Stewart, and Snoop Dogg, Pete didn't hold back in skewering the pop star. He even took a few shots at himself, with one of the most scathing things that you will ever hear on a roast when Pete said, "I lost my dad on 9/11, and I always regretted growing up without a dad. Until I met your dad, Justin. Now I'm glad mine's dead." While the jokes did draw a fair amount of controversy, Pete took it all in stride as his set was praised by comics and fans alike. He followed that up the next year with a hilarious roast of Rob Lowe, as well as his first stand-up special on Comedy Central entitled Pete Davidson, SMD. While Comedy Central at first did not allow the SMD acronym, he reminded the company that the letters were actually his father's initials and got away with it. Pete began dating Cassie David, daughter of Seinfeld creator Larry David. The relationship ended sometime in 2018. His success continued to grow. In 2017, he announced via Instagram he was quitting drugs and was sober for the first time in 8 years. However, he now states that the only drug he uses is marijuana as a way to combat his Crohn's. Pete has also opened up about his mental health issues. While in rehab to quit marijuana, he stated doctors put him on meds suspecting him of being bipolar. After suffering a nervous breakdown, his doctor told him that he was instead suffering from borderline personality disorder. Pete's struggle with mental health came to the forefront after his public breakup with his fiancée Ariana Grande. This came shortly after the passing of Mac Miller's accidental drug overdose. Mac had previously dated Ariana, and with the proximity of his death to their relationship, it was just too much for them to bear. This breakup did lead to a considerable amount of back and forth between the two stars as Ariana spoke about Pete in Vogue magazine, stating she only dated Pete as a distraction, as well as that smash hit song Thank You Next. I mean, even Pete acknowledged that the song was a slap, but he also expressed his gripes with how the situation played out in the media on his comedy special, Alive in New York. While he's battled his fair share of adversity, things do seem to be looking up for the bright young comic, especially in the public eye. In November 2021, it was confirmed that Pete is indeed dating Kim Kardashian. A lot of people did not see this coming, but I think it makes sense following Kim's hilarious appearance on SNL. I think this relationship reveal confirms who wrote that hilarious monologue. I think it's safe to say Pete is one of the best at what he does, and it looks like his career will only be up from here. Thanks for checking out this video. Subscribe if you're new to the channel and leave a comment for who you'd like us to feature next.